The Boss at Six Flags St. Louis is one of the most polarizing coasters out there. Several people love this ride, while others hate it. I'm one who really likes this ride, and in this review, I'll be stating what makes me like it so much. The Boss opened in 2000 and was built by Custom Coasters International, or CCI for short. Even though it's over 20 years old, it has some of the more impressive stats for wooden coasters. According to the roller coaster database, the Boss has a max speed of 66.3 miles per hour, a height of 122 feet, and a 150-foot double-down first drop. The reason why the drop is bigger than the height is because of the terrain that the Boss sits on. It makes great use of the hilly terrain in the back of the park. Because of that, the ride can be seen from just about anywhere in the park because the ride's lift hill, mid-course, and the turns before and after the mid-course tower over the trees. A lot of the layout is hidden behind the trees, so this makes it a harder coaster to get footage or pictures of. If you want to get some good shots of the Boss's low to the ground sections, you want to visit the park at the beginning of the season because there are no trees blocking the ride, so you'll be able to capture the train running through the trees. You can also get some great shots of this ride from the train if you time it very well. Because of all the high points on this ride and all the sections of the ride that are hidden in the trees, it means that the Boss is massive. That statement is backed up by a track length of 4,631 feet. It used to have a track length of 5,051 feet long, but I'll get to why it changed in a little bit. Still, a track length of over 4,600 feet is really dang impressive. Now let's move on to the actual review. When you get to Six Flags St. Louis, the Boss is located near the back left corner of the park, so it can take a few minutes to get to the ride from the park's front entrance. When you get to the Boss's entrance, you walk under this cool sign that looks like a castle drawbridge. I think it's a nice touch because the ride is located in the Britannia section of Six Flags St. Louis, so I think it fits the medieval feel of the area. From there, you have to head up the queue line. Now, anyone who has been to Six Flags St. Louis knows that getting to the Boss's station is a massive hike, so be prepared to get a good workout on your way up there. As you're heading up the massive queue line, you get a great view of the rest of your park to your left, and you can see the Boss's lift hill to your right. Once you get into the station, you can choose your row. I personally prefer the front row over the back row on the Boss, mainly because of the sense of speed and the smoother ride experience. But I can see why people would prefer the back row. There are several awesome airtime moments that are the strongest in the back. Once you've chosen your row, you're greeted with Gerstlauer trains with a single lap bar. The Boss has 3 of these trains, and these are painted either yellow, green, or purple. Whichever train you get may change the experience you get on this ride, but more on that later. I know a lot of people who hate these trains, but I personally don't mind them. The minimal restraint system allows me to get plenty of airtime, assuming I don't get stapled. Plus, I feel that they aren't as restricting as other wooden coaster trains, so you feel more open and exposed, which makes the ride feel much more intense than it would be otherwise. Now let's get into this coaster's ride experience. Once you depart the station, you pass the transfer track on your left before making a few turns leading into the 122-foot tall lift hill. The views of the park are amazing from this ride. You can see the front of the park if you look behind you, and you can see Screaming Eagle to your right. Once you get to the top of the lift hill, the ride makes a fairly tight turnaround and then plunges down the first drop. This is an awesome drop, especially if you're towards the back of the train. Those in the back get some sustained ejector airtime the whole way down. I'd say it's the best first drop in the park. However, when you're in the front row, seeing the ride structure in front of you before you drop is really cool too. Probably my favorite time I've experienced this drop was actually in the front row. This past October, there was fog all around the Boss, and as I crested the drop, I saw the fog surrounding the bottom of it, and plunging straight into it was an amazing experience. After the first drop, you fly down a straightaway into the ride structure, and while it feels straight on ride, it actually is slightly slanted. This element does a great job showcasing this ride's speed. You feel like you're going way faster than you actually are. From there, you go into yet another crazy drop. And unlike the first drop, where I find to be stronger in the back, this one I find to be stronger in the front. In the front, I get launched out of my seat on that drop, where in the back I don't usually get as much airtime. This second drop is also a prime example of how the Boss uses the terrain. After that second drop, the ride makes a slightly banked turn, which delivers some strong laterals throughout the train. An airtime-filled speed hill follows that, and this hill delivers some great airtime no matter where you're sitting. From there, you shoot up into the first big turnaround. There isn't really much airtime ascending into this turnaround, but once you get to the top, the lateral forces kick in again as the train rounds the turn. The train then plummets from that turn, and much like the first drop, this drop is best experienced towards the back of the train. Once you dive down that drop, you hit what I consider to be the most intense part of the ride. It's an unbanked turn that really throws you to the right side of the train. The laterals are very strong and sustained throughout the whole turn, especially if the ride is hauling. However, it can be pretty rough depending on where you're sitting, so be ready for it. More information on this ride's smoothness in a bit. After the low to the ground turn, the train climbs into another turnaround. This ascent offers a quick pop of airtime in the front with how sudden it is. The boss then turns into the mid-course brake run, which is arguably the most disappointing part of the ride. Prior to 2018, the train just passed through the mid-course without slowing down, but that was also because the ride's massive helix was still there. But during the 2017 and 2018 off-season, that helix was removed. Because of how fast the train went through the helix, Six Flags St. Louis had to slow down the trains when they hit the mid-course. On most of the rides, the train slows down a lot, and it sometimes even comes to a complete stop, meaning all the great speed you had up until that point was now gone. I've heard some people call the boss a dive coaster with how the train sometimes stops before the drop off of it. Depending on how much the train slows down on the mid-course, the speed in which the train navigates the second half will vary. If you slow down a lot or stop entirely, the second half will be slower with less airtime. This is what happens most of the time. However, it is still possible to get a trimless ride. If you're lucky enough to get this rare but insane experience, the speed the train takes that second half will be very similar to what it was like from the boss's opening year of 2000 to the end of 2017. Your best chance of getting a trimless ride is to ride the boss as early in the morning as possible. The trains likely won't be as full, and this means they'll crawl around the turn and in the mid-course. From what I've noticed, the slower the train goes around the turn in the mid-course, the more likely you are to get a trimless ride. This isn't always the case, however, as there have been times where I've been on it when it crawled in the mid-course, but the train did slow down. Earlier in the review, I mentioned that whatever train you get could change your ride. This is where that statement applies the most. I have ridden all three trains on the boss numerous times, and I have noticed that the green train tends to run slower than the yellow train or the purple train. If you're wanting to know what train you should ride and if you're hoping for a trimless ride, I'd say the green train is your best bet if they're running it. After the drop off the mid-course, which again, I think is best taken in the back, you rise up into the last major turnaround on the ride, and unless it's trimless, you will crawl through this turn. Every time I've ridden it where it isn't trimless, especially if the train comes to a dead stop on the mid-course, it feels like the train's gonna valley because of how slow it can go through the top of it. After you pass through that turnaround, you dive down the last big drop on the ride. I find this drop to be the final strong moment of airtime for those in the back row. From here, you go through another lateral-filled turn that routes behind the queue line. I don't think the laterals are quite as strong as the low-to-the-ground turn before the mid-course, but they're still good. Sometimes I also get a sudden pop of airtime exiting the turn since it dips down a little bit. Following that turn, you'll hit an airtime hill that doesn't deliver much airtime in any row except for the weak floater airtime you'll get in the front. From off-ride, it looks like it would fling you out of your seat, but when you're on it, it usually leaves a lot to be desired, unless the ride is running trimless. If it's running trimless, you may get some decent airtime on the front. The train hits one more elevated turn before heading towards the final turn where the helix used to be. When the boss is hauling, the train will absolutely rip through that turn, delivering some more insane laterals. The boss then hits a double up. This is probably the best moment of airtime on the ride for those in the front. Both hills deliver some sweet ejector airtime, especially with the speed the ride takes that last turn beforehand. Even though the majority of the second half is usually pretty lackluster, I think that the double up makes up for it. After the double up, the ride slams to a stop in the final brakes, and it's at this point where you realize what you just went through. I always hit the brakes speechless with how intense the boss is. Now let's discuss the smoothness of this ride. For a lot of people, this is the make or break as to whether they like it or not. I personally think it really depends on where in the train you're sitting. Naturally, the front row of every car is going to be smoother than a wheel seat, but overall I think the ride is still fairly smooth. Even in the very back row, it wasn't that rough. I have ridden some smoother wooden coasters than the boss, like American Thunder in the same park, but I've also done some coasters that are way rougher, such as Great American Scream Machine at Six Flags over Georgia. Overall, I find that it is usually on the smoother side with the exception of the rare rides that end up being really rough. I have noticed that Six Flags St. Louis has been doing track work on different parts of the ride in recent years, and I think it has been paying off nicely. Riding this coaster in the daylight is one thing, but at night, it's a completely different story. The secluded setting that the boss has makes it feel way more out of control at night than it is in the daytime. That setting, along with the phenomenal sense of speed the ride has, makes for one of the best night rides I've experienced. I do prefer the night rides on the Voyage and Outlaw Run, but I think that the night ride on the boss is right up there with both of them. Now it's time for me to give the boss a final score. This is a no-brainer for me. I have to give it a 10 out of 10. I know a lot of people would give it a lower score because the mid-course kills the second half, along with the ride not being the smoothest thing out there. While I think that the ride is quite smooth, I do agree that the mid-course does kill the second half. However, I'm willing to overlook the mid-course and the smoothness because I think the rest of the ride is still amazing regardless. As for where this ride ranks for me, it's currently my favorite coaster at Six Flags St. Louis, and out of 208 coasters I've ridden at the time of this recording, the Boss is my number 5. I know that not everyone will agree with everything I've said in this video, so all opinions are welcome. On a side note, I'm pretty sure that the Boss is the coaster I've ridden the most. I haven't been counting my total lifetime rides on this coaster, but I'm like 99% sure that this is my most ridden coaster. If you've ridden the Boss, post your comments below about what you thought about it. If you have not ridden this ride yet, feel free to comment below what parts of the ride you're most excited for. That concludes my review of the Boss. This was my first review, so I know it probably isn't the best thing out there. Any tips to improve my reviews are greatly appreciated. Before you leave, be sure to like this video, subscribe to me if you haven't done so already, and hit the bell to turn on all notifications so you do not miss any of my future videos. Thank you guys for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.